Okay, so we were talking about decommissioning of nuclear generation capacity, and this often happens after well-publicized incidents with nuclear energy. And so a lot of stuff happened after the Chernobyl disaster. A lot of power plants were decommissioned then, and then also after the Fukushima accident in 2011, a lot of power plants were decommissioned. And actually, that decommissioning still continues today because that can be a very long process in terms of planning what's going to take up the slack in terms of electricity production. And so it's interesting to think about what your sources of electricity are going to be if you're going from nuclear, which is basically carbon-free if you ignore all the concrete that you need to build the plants. For example, so the European Union has seen a lot of decommissioning of nuclear generating capacity. If you look at what's been added to the mix to make up for that, there's a couple of interesting points. So the first is for the EU as a whole, they've added more wind and solar generation than gas and coal, which from a CO2 emission standpoint is good. But you'll notice that there's been a lot more energy decommissioned than they've put back online. So they're actually making do with less now than they had before. And some of this, has to do with, increases in efficiency and that sort of thing. But basically, they're generating less electricity now than they were a couple of years ago. So that's one interesting thing. Now, if we break this down, I'm going to single out a couple of countries here. So this is Germany. So Germany decommissioned almost 33 terawatt hours of nuclear generation. And to make up for that, they've almost, I think, gotten back to their baseline. But you can see most of what they've added has been coal. So this is, again, from a CO2 emissions standpoint, kind of a dumb move. But they have their reasons for doing it. But that's kind of what's going on in Germany. The other country to point out is France. France historically has been one of, if not the largest nuclear power generator in the world. They're it's a very big thing for them. They've taken a significant amount offline. And what's happened to them is you can see that they're very far from making up that deficit that they've incurred by decommissioning 82 terawatt hours of nuclear generation. They've put online, it's been mostly gas that's come online, but the thing that's happened is that they used to be a net exporter of electricity. And so their neighboring countries like Belgium, Switzerland, the smaller countries like that, they were relying a lot on imports from France. Now, France is a net energy importer, a net electricity importer. So it's really kind of scrambled the whole energy market in France. And they're kind of going through a lot right now. I think probably you saw in the news that the prime minister stepped down yesterday. So it's a bit of a mess right now going on in France. But anyway, yeah, Tommy.
When you say the electricity is being sold, not energy, does that mean they have like wires between they're sending electrons, or are they sending it in the form of like gas?
So they're sending electrons. France itself does not. Trying to think, I think they're probably net importers of natural gas. Most of the European countries get their gas from either North Africa or Norway. But they're exporting electrons. That's their thing. So anyway, some interesting kind of geopolitical implications in this, but that's kind of what's going on in nuclear right now. Okay. That brings us to the end of our unit on nuclear energy. I'm going to transition now to our last unit, which is on kind of a mishmash of a whole bunch of things. Renewables, storage, and microgrids. Actually, these three topics are not completely unrelated because if you move to an electric grid that has a lot of renewable energy on it, as we'll see, you need to have a lot of storage. And this can be accomplished by creating these things called microgrids. So let's get into it. Okay, so renewable energy, and I've already kind of introduced this topic in the context of why nuclear is not considered renewable energy. But anyway, it's energy from sources that are naturally replenishing but flow limited. So what that means is they're naturally occurring, but they only produce a certain amount every day that you cannot accelerate. Okay. So one way of thinking about that is that the sun is up there and the sun is producing sending a finite amount of energy to the earth every day. You cannot increase that. All you can do is try to harvest what's there. Let's see, that's the EIA's definition. The UN has a slightly different definition. Energy derived from natural sources that are replenished at a higher rate than they are consumed. Okay, so that's why nuclear doesn't fit the definition, because we are depleting the Earth's store of uranium faster than it's being produced. Okay. You guys probably know this, but I think it's an interesting factoid that any element heavier than iron has to have been generated by a supernova. Iron is the heaviest element that can be fused in a star. So think about that. We're relying on supernovas for nuclear power. Anyway, so renewable energy, generally, it's going to be hydropower, geothermal, wind, solar, ocean energy, which includes both tides and wave energy. And then I put biomass here in parentheses because basically the idea here with biomass being renewable is that you cut down a tree, you burn the wood, you emit the CO2. The CO2 is incorporated in plant matter in trees that subsequently grow. So it's kind of renewable. The problem with that is that the time scale associated with that is very, very long. So it's a little iffy. But we often see biomass being included as renewable energy. So why do we like renewable energy? Well, it's low carbon inherently, so that's good if we want to reduce carbon emissions. Another interesting point is that it's much more insulated from commodity price shocks than fossil fuels. So, for example, at least most places in the United States, a lot of the electricity is coming from coal and natural gas. So if the price of natural gas spikes, you're going to have a higher electricity bill. We've seen this in Europe, especially. They're very sensitive to this. Renewables can also be deployed in a lot of places in such a way that maybe you can reduce your dependence on imports of oil. So a good example of this is I grew up in New Hampshire. Most people in New Hampshire and Maine heat their houses with heating oil. And that heating oil has to be delivered by tanker ship from somewhere else, either the Gulf Coast or Europe or something like that. If you can switch that so that you're doing, electric heating, either with a heat pump or with resistance heating, where the electricity is generated locally from renewables, then that's going to be a lot better at reducing your dependence on imports. Now, why we have to import liquid hydrocarbons to New England by boat and not by pipeline is a discussion for another time, but it's a very pipeline limited part of the country. So anyway. Okay, so this is, and I went online earlier and I tried to find more recent data from the IEA and I was not able to find it. So 10 minutes before class, I'm like, oh crap, I need to update my slides. And so I was not able to find it in the 10 minutes I had before class, but maybe I'll go back and look. But this is through 2021. You can see that almost 12% of global energy supply was from renewables. Okay, so that's on a global basis. Now, here in Texas, actually, we're doing much better than the world as a whole. On sunny, windy days, we have upwards of 50% of our electricity being generated from solar or wind. So we do pretty well, but a lot of parts of the world are not like that. So about 12%, that's kind of our baseline. Now, if you look at, this is at least the IEA's net zero scenario, by 2030, we're going to need over 30% of global energy supply to be from renewables. So you can see that the rate of change from 2010 to 2021 is not going to get us there. But I've been reading a lot recently about there's been a huge acceleration in deployment of renewables, especially solar. So I think, things are, we'll see if we actually get there, but it's not quite as bad as trying to extrapolate that line. There's been improvements recently in there. And if we look at the role of renewable power in overall CO2 emissions reductions, this is kind of a busy slide, but this is looking at what the IEA projects going forward in their net zero scenario. So this dot here, that is overall emissions reductions that they forecast in this scenario. And they're due to a variety of different things. But you can see that wind and solar, which is the dark green here, that is, the largest component of emissions reductions. So it's not like the whole thing. There's a lot of other stuff going on here, including electrification. Hydrogen is part of that. CCUS is part of that. But it's a significant component of emissions reduction. So it's one piece of the puzzle that we're going to see moving forward. And I'll just kind of close with this slide here because I know we're running out of time. The interesting thing is that they forecast an overall reduction in energy supply, and that's due to increases in efficiency of how we use energy, but they're forecasting by 2050. So, here's wind, solar, and other renewables. They're the top wedge here. Again, we're looking at several hundreds of exajoules of energy from these sources moving forward into the 2040s and 2050s. So they're growing, the need for them is growing, and so it's important to understand how to integrate them to your energy mix. Okay, we will stop there for today. I hope you all have a good weekend, and I'll see you back in here Monday for our last class. Sniff, sniff.